Out to the program where we gather every day at this time. Well, we do it Monday through Friday anyway. And what we do when we gather is continue to address the issues between food production and food consumption. Andrew was so perplexed by the whole issue of the eclipse and getting run over
Yep.
on an interstate. He just said, "I'm just going to check out. I'm not going
He's
to be a
just
part of
done.
this."
Out. Can't do it.
That's a
No.
lie. That
Ah,
fact checking. I'm fact checking myself. That's not at all what happened. Andrew's busy pretending to be in the dairy nutrition business. Jay Truitt,
yep.
though, has no excuse, and he apparently
No.
marks himself safe post Eclipse 2024.
And we were right in the main strip. It got basically completely dark where we were in Dallas yesterday. All the street lights came on, car lamps went on, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, we survived.
I'm sure glad. Did Abbott? I didn't hear if Abbott declared a state of emergency. He must have, because 17 states
Well,
did.
so it was funny, and it started like on Saturday here. That they started warning people that there was a crazy amount of traffic that was going to be everywhere, right? And expect delays, et cetera, et cetera. And on Saturday, I had a meeting in another part of the metroplex, and when I came back, Interstate 30, there, my little navigation system, right, tells me that there'd been an incident on Interstate 30 that had it temporarily blocked. So I cut off on one of the side streets and ended up driving through literal Main Street, downtown Dallas, on Main
No.
Street, as a way to just get to the side of town that I live on. I live kind of on the opposite corner of that, and so lo and behold, though, I went past they were having like an art, I don't know, an art um, festival or something, right, in the downtown area, and the Eclipse crazies decided to take that event as permission to just go nuts, and they had flooded down there. It was like one of the more bizarre things I've ever seen. People with tin hats, literally, aluminum foil hats, you name it.
Literally
Yeah,
wearing the
literally.
tinfoil hat.
Yeah, it was. There was a lot of different options. I wanted to take a picture, and then I thought, you know what? Some things you should preserve only in your memory, not so that you can ever go
We
back
can't.
to it and
Hey,
revisit it.
now that's just selfish because now we
Yeah,
can't enjoy the same sights that you and sounds. You had a video, we could enjoy that right here, but now you're being selfish. Now you're the only one that
no,
knows.
because the tin hat lady was not wearing the appropriate amount of clothing either. Really, I felt like, to be in public, and you know what? She wasn't built to be wearing that clothing either, and so it wouldn't have it wouldn't have been good. I wouldn't have been built for it either. But she was built a lot like me, so we'll just leave it at that. It was
Yeah,
ugly.
I mean, I just wish you hadn't gone there, but anyway.
It was like being at the state fair all over again on a hot Thursday.
Only the food wasn't as good.
Yeah, no. Well, I didn't stop, but there were. It is funny, right? Capitalism still does reign. There was probably 40 food trucks that had decided to squeeze in to that
Oh,
area,
perfect.
and so you could smell deep fried Twinkies and et
Oh,
cetera,
I
et
just made
cetera.
myself hungry for some garlic parmesan
Yeah,
cheese curds. Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
could
Why
have
did I
happened,
bring that?
right?
Yeah.
Could have happened.
Probably because I wanted to talk about this dairy thing, and I tried to get a hold of a guy who's apparently in the dairy business, somebody named Greg Dowd. You know anything about him?
I have heard of him. I met him years ago at the National Press Club. Yeah.
I was actually going to rail on him pretty hard because the press release he came out with this weekend, It doesn't make any. It's ridiculous to me. Talking about farmers first, which we agree with, but I don't
Yes.
see his organization putting farmers first. So we'll have to have that conversation when he decides to actually show up. Now that he knows what I'm going to rail on him about,
Yeah.
but there is a first of all, before I get to what is taking place, do you understand the milk marketing order? Because
No.
milk is not just about how many, like the beef business. How many cattle are there? What's the demand? And what are we going to pay? That's not at all what happens in the dairy world. Do you understand that?
Yeah, and I understand that it's not at all like what like any of the other orders that I've read, and I am one of the, I don't know how many people, but I bet there's not that many people that have actually sat down and really read that order and the revisions. I saw I have actually, and this makes no sense to me at all. I've seen the algorithm even written out that they structure all that by. Um, and I know people that understand that math that that goes into that, and I also understand the computer it runs that program today. But um, no, again I've read it, and it's basically like me reading a Japanese novel. I understand there's letters on the page. I just don't know what they mean,
I
and
mean,
it seems
Kim
pretty
Bremer told me
confusing to
this
me.
weekend, and she's in the dairy business every day. The dairymen who've been in this for generations call her regularly to ask her why they got the price they got for their milk, and they don't even know themselves.
Yeah. I read the order and I can't answer the question, but I do know that I have sat down with people that like tried to help me understand it. When the For me, it all started when they did the dairy buyout. I tried to understand why they did the dairy buyout, right? Back
Why
way
did
back
they do the
when.
dairy buyout?
Not in the 85 Farm
Well,
Bill was when the original
I know, but I don't
idea kind
understand
of
why
surfaced.
we have government buying dairy cows to minimize
Yeah.
the put in a quota. It was somewhat of a quota system.
No, absolutely. It was the whole reason I ended up in Washington D.C. was that legislation. I
Really?
mean, it drove me to the point that I knew that I had to actually do something in the public policy realm. That and the Conservation Reserve Program, which I think still is one of the worst ideas that anybody ever came up with.
I got a story about that, but I'd like to hold that till we get through with this milk mark because
Sure.
it'll consume the rest of our show. Anyway,
No, but there's like two or three people that there were two or three staffers on Capitol Hill that I knew that were intimately familiar with the order, how it worked, the mechanisms that triggered one thing or another, right, and how you could uh, uh, say manipulated is the wrong thing, but how that number is manipulated to
it sounds like
equate
it's
to a
manipulated to
price.
me.
Well, and I think it very well may be like one of those things that this would be my observation from just thinking back on all the thousand conversations I had about it with people that do understand it. Maybe a lot like the jobs or inflation numbers, where sooner or later you figure out that like there's one ultimately key thing that's not included,
Hmm.
and it's not included today because it wasn't there in 1940 something, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And it ends up being the most important thing today. Milk in a in a milk carton, in a paper milk carton. Milk's not the most expensive part of that carton, right?
No,
A-
absolutely.
and so that's one of those factors that work in reverse against milk farmers, right? A milk producer. Uh, uh, but no, I again, I am one of the people that's read the Acton order. I've read it. I did honestly just sit down a couple of different times, several times, and read it. I have a pretty good comprehension level. I'm pretty good at understanding stuff like that. That one didn't really make sense to me. It still doesn't make sense to me, and I can't say that I could even describe to somebody even the cornerstones of other than some real simple supply and demand elements that are in it. And I'm not a big believer that demand is really indicative of profit on the farm at all. The Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, and the correlation is zero in my book between profit, because demand doesn't
Yeah.
include cost.
Right. We got to go to a break. Jay Truitt, Trent Loos. We will continue to talk about why government intervenes in pricing commodities. But before I let you go, Greg Hager continues to bring real world experiences in life and will touch your soul with his songs. That's actually why he was named the Cowboy Entertainer of the Year, because his songs are genuine, authentic, and I would suggest you go to his website and find that for yourself. If you're in his presence while singing, you'll want more. GregHager.com. Get more details, or better yet, book him to come to one of your events. We're back with more Roll Route, J Trail, Trent Loos after this. Back in 3, 2, 1. Welcome back. Roll Route, Trent Loos alongside Jay Truitt. So, I have a friend, and I'm going to leave him out of this, the name out of this, because I don't want to cause any problems. He's a member of a cheese plant as a co op member. His base price right now is $16.50 per hundredweight. That particular cheesemaker is importing milk from Michigan at $3 a hundredweight.
Wow.
Three.
So
Nobody,
that's
I mean, the best dairyman at $16, you're maybe breaking even. I don't know if there's any dairyman today with input prices could be at 14 or not. But when your own co-op has the access to $3 a hundredweight milk, and your members are getting paid $16, you don't have to be much of a rocket scientist to figure out that's a path of collision.
yeah. I mean, so that would be that
Oh,
producing over all of the other caps related, because
you
I mean,
you
one of the
you
things
blinked out on us, Jay. Could you start that over?
no, I'm just saying that obviously that would be one of the places where somebody's buying surplus milk, because
That's exactly what happened.
the basic element of the act and order. I mean, there is one simple component. It tells you what a processor must pay for a minimum price, and so somebody's operating outside the system in that regard. Then the
Okay,
question is, why do we
let
even
me
have a system?
well, that is the question. But let me
Right?
qualify
Yeah.
how this takes place and why it's not a violation of the milk marketing order.
Uh-huh.
Is because said farmer, said dairy farmer in Michigan is selling milk to his local plant, whatever plant that may be. They have more milk than they can process, so the processor sells it to another
Right.
processor in
Yeah.
Wisconsin. So they're it's not the farmer who's getting paid less; it's the processor, which, by the way, probably the processor in Michigan is owned by the farmer too. So
Right.
ultimately, it's costing them. But when you have somebody buying milk, it's like the subsidized wind energy thing. When you have coal plants who are being given electricity from a wind development center instead of buying coal, you know that there is a correction coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Something is awry, and I mean, it's kind of interesting. Um, so again, I think the last time that I read the act and order was when we did the 2002 Farm Bill. Um, and so that's a long time ago. I realized that, but I mean, this thing started in the 30s, way before mine and your time. So you've had a chance to see it before. But I think the last time I really read it, and it was because of all the changes they instituted, and somewhere in the early 2000s, I can't remember whether it's the 2002, um, or maybe the following Farm Bill, that they started going to this reference survey pricing mechanism, right? Because they were having trouble with price reporting, and there are too many closed loop systems, because a lot of dairy farmers, again, are co-op member owners of a bottler that is doing marketing, maybe in in a bunch of different ways and a bunch of different product lines, and so it was hard for them. We had a tiny bit of debate about that. It's hard for people to figure out what was what. Um, and so they came up with this whole thing. But again, the real cornerstone of the problem is that people invite government into the pricing of their product, and government can't even report prices. I mean, they're just horrible at it. Number one. Number two, it's way delayed. I mean, in most cases, their reporting infrastructure is so slow and tedious
Well,
that they can't do it.
if you go look at any data on USDA website today, the last census data they'll give you, this is as of 2017. My goodness,
Yeah.
we got 114,000 USDA employees and we can't get data more current than 8 years.
Well, and I can drive down the highway with my Gas Buddy app on, and it can tell me the prices of all the diesel fuel around me, for 50 miles and whether or not I need a coupon to get it, kind of thing, right?
But
Um,
okay, let's go back to the 80s. And it's kind of sad for you and I to think about things that happened in the 80s were part of history. But hey, we're that
yeah.
old, Jay. Uh,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
we do not want the government, USDA, anybody involved in pricing farm commodities at any level. How and
No.
why did the dairymen allow this to happen?
Well, and again, it dates back to 1933, right? It's a Depression era policy that just never stopped. And there have
Part
been
of
a
the
lot of changes.
Agricultural Adjustment Act?
No,
That
so
was in 33.
the milk, what is the name of the stupid thing? Um,
I think it's
they
called the
had
Milk Marketing Order.
the original act that was passed to manage milk prices. I think,
I think it was part of the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 33.
yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right, and it ended up being one of the maybe the principal component for a lot of people, for a lot of states. It was because dairy is a principal industry in 1933. It was a principal industry probably in more than half the states in the United States. It's not, maybe not today, but it was then.
Think about the data on this, and I'm going to go find it so I have the exact data. But in 33, everybody had a milk cow or 12 milk cows.
Yeah, yeah, pretty
And
much
then
every farming operation did,
absolutely
right?
every
Yeah,
every
cattle
kid growing up
operation
on a
as well.
farm listened to dad talk about milking cows before he went to school. And
Yeah,
we all heard that story. In 33, every farm had chickens and had a dairy cow. That's the two things that every
yeah,
farm had. And then
yeah,
the Agricultural Adjustment Act comes into play in 33. Fast forward 90 years later, 1% of farms have chickens, have dairy cows.
yeah.
Thank you, federal government.
Right. Again, it's kind of like it's one of the interesting dynamics that arose. Every time somebody that's enrolled in the CRP program, and I know I'm kind of bringing it up in a separate setting, but and you said we're happy to talk about it. But everybody that talks to me about a conservation reserve program or a land bank idling program, um, and my first question when they start complaining about concentration in the industry was, did you participate in that program first? Because if you participated in that program, I've put you on the other side of the fence.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't mean that really as an insult, but you've already shown me that you want government to actually control this, and now you're expecting government, which you know doesn't do a very good job, to actually manage your whole marketplace. You got to think through that, right? And be really honest and mature about the answer that you're going to give, because people go, well, like, oh, you can't, there's no way for it to fix. Well, but it does kind of fix itself on a regular basis, and entities collapse and reinvent themselves, and you have, you know, we had this discussion about Tyson and how Tyson is for the most part reinventing itself, not really even as a pork or a chicken company anymore, but as a food company and a food ingredient company, right? It's a worldwide discussion, or the discussion about them has to be a worldwide discussion today, because they're the same as Italy or Cargill or any one of the Brazilian strongholds in the food world, they're all the same.
That's actually a worthy discussion and probably ties into our milk discussion pretty good. But because you see,
Yeah,
Hormel did that first. Hormel made
right,
the commitment
exactly,
that we're going to be a food company, not a hog processing company.
right,
And so the Fremont plant, Fremont, Nebraska, they sold to a group of, I believe there was 200 farmers who are investors in Wholestone Foods, and then Hormel wrote them an agreement to purchase the pork from them for X number of years, but they got out of the risk of being a packer and they
yeah,
wanted to be a food company. And Tyson's just doing that in a different way, in a different color, but doing the
yeah,
same thing. It should be
right.
alarming to all farmers that the food companies no longer want to be involved in the production of the product itself.
Well, ConAgra is, I think, another great
Oh,
example of
that's a great example. One time
yeah,
owned
of a
Monfort, now
company
owned
that
by
has
JBS Swift. Yeah.
right, that has transitioned itself like 4 or 5 times, and then finally just became a wholly owned subsidiary inside another company, right? And um, some of those even were private, then public, then private. Tyson's case, they're a public company, right?
Yeah.
You can actually go see all this. They
And
don't
I'm
really
pretty
hide
sure
any of it.
Don Tyson flips over in his grave about once a week with what's happening at Tyson today. Jay Truitt, Trent Loos. We'll take a break. We'll be back with more. I want to remind you about Apache Sprayers, innovation, technology, and getting the job done in the field, particularly this time of year when you start thinking about how am I going to control those pests? There'll be weeds, there'll be insects. Simpson Farm Enterprises from Hayes, Kansas gets it done efficiently if you're in the northern Great Plains, High Plains, Apache. So go to the website simpsonfarm.com or highplainsapache.com or stop in one of the stores. That's even better. It's all about the Apache sprayer technology. We're back with more Roll Route, second half, just ahead.
I grab a cup of coffee, Trent.
10-4. I'll do a little refill. What I should be doing is I should have my system set up so that I can play a commercial for y'all while you're listening to us do nothing.
All right.
Thanks for joining us on the live broadcast here, by the way.
Oh yeah,
I do have a
everybody.
system, Jay, where I could play a commercial, but I just don't ever take the time to load it and get it done right. So, all right, we're back in 3, 2, 1. Welcome back. Roll Route, Trent Loos alongside Jay Truitt. I don't know. What'd you do?
Oh, did I disappear?
No, it was like you hit like I just committed a foul and you punched a buzzer.
Mm-mm. Oh no, no, you're still on.
Okay.
I'm still
Yeah.
on. You're
Okay.
still something.
Uh,
Okay.
so there is no wherewithal or desire to get the government out of pricing milk.
Nah. All right. Well, there. No. So I think that's probably partially true, but not completely true, right? And the milk industry is having an open public discussion over the last year or so that's the same as almost everybody else has had at some point in the last say 15 or 20 years, and that is that who do we really trust to kind of engage in regulating the playing field and making sure that it's fair, et cetera, et cetera. And so then you have to ask the question, all right, so do I think the government is the right entity? And we always end up defaulting back to them because they're the only ones that are truly independent. But then that's the claim that's made. But really, is it truly in the government's best interest to regulate milk prices so that it benefits farmers? Little,
No, it
right?
has nothing to do with the farmer because
Yeah,
I
I
can go
mean,
to a grocery store in Grand Island, Nebraska, did it yet Saturday, and purchase 3 gallon of milk for $2.89 a gallon.
right,
That has
right.
nothing to do with farmer benefit.
Mm. And so then the next question is so who are they really trying to benefit? Consumers, right? I mean, and when you're buying it at $2.89, that might actually be the case when it's 8.89. Here a couple of years ago, for consumers, and farmers weren't making but like a buck more than what they are now, or $2 more than what they're making now, then something is also still awry. And
Yeah.
so I and on top of that, are they really care about kids when we're trying to we refuse to give them whole milk and insist on pumping skim milk products into their system, and then complain about them being more obese than any generation in history, right? While we
Yeah,
also
absolutely.
don't allow them to play
That's
dodgeball.
my pet peeve.
Yeah, but I mean, so I I think a lot of us have lost confidence in the government's ability to just to be a. uh, They probably never were a good arbitrator of any of this, and we're just now figuring it out more easily because information's easier to access for the
Yeah.
most part. But
So, Jay, we know that every commodity has a checkoff. And if you include the checkoff that the processors pay, the dairy checkoff annually, the revenue is $365 million.
okay,
Nobody's even close to that.
yeah, that's
I
giant.
mean, beef is what, 80 million at the best.
80 and
Uh,
some change, yeah,
yeah.
on the peak.
And so the dairy producer is paying the checkoff, plus the dairy farmer has a processor fee where a little amount, but a little amount amounts to a lot, is withheld from every check, every dairy check that goes to the processor to increase infrastructure. It's like, why is all of this on the backs of the dairy farmer?
Right.
That
Yeah.
it just needs to be restructured, because what's happening is I've even had people with 20,000 cows tell me, Trent, I'm not big enough. I got to get bigger because I'm losing out on the scales of the economies of scale. I was like, you're milking 20,000 cows. How can you not be big enough? And
Right.
consequently, the guys who are milking 100 cows, unless they're doing direct marketing, which, by the way, is where you're going to have to go, which also seems to be what is dying, or the blatant target of killing in this high path avian influenza situation, because you continue to see more and more people say, oh, you've got to stop drinking raw milk. Well, that's been the avenue for people like for J.R. Burdick to go direct to
Yeah.
the consumer and sell products that the consumer wants without government intervention. Now they're trying to stop that because government
Right.
can't get in the middle of pricing.
Yeah. No, and so I listen. I really am the wrong person to talk to about um, how that literally breaks down. But everyone can observe the fact that um, government doesn't make good choices when it comes to telling you what you can, should, or won't ever get a chance to eat. And but that's just not what they're best at, right? And they
Oh,
may be. I'm
wait a minute. What are they? What is government best at?
no, I started to give something that say I started to literally say, they may be good at, but then I couldn't think of anything to say after that. So I'm not for sure what they're really good
Oh,
at. Oh,
I know what they're good
collecting.
at. They're good at creating employment opportunities for themselves. They're really
Yeah,
good at
right.
that.
Yeah, because they're really not even good at collecting revenue. I mean, they really kind of suck at that as well. And
You got
uh,
114,000 people working at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and you have 180,000 farm families producing 80% of the food in the country. It's a joke inside the USDA office that, oh, what's your farmer's
my
name?
farmer,
Every
I
single USDA
yeah,
employee's got one farmer they're responsible for. It's
right, yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah. No, it really is. And it has been for some time, right? Again, there's this lie that was kind of perpetrated, and they did it because they wanted to actually give that block some political clout when they were on the same page as that political block. And the number was, oh well, 2% of America is it involved in agriculture, right? And then a family farms make are 2 million people in the United States. Well, you start doing real simple math and you realize that that doesn't equate, right? There's 330 million people, and do a 2% number.
Yeah.
How many should that be, right? It's not the same number that they just reported. It's not even anywhere close. And so then we got to this thing of, well, that and 90% of them are owned by an individual or a family farm, right? A family
Hmm.
operation. And I think those numbers probably still are right.
I agree.
Um, but the 80-20 rule is the 80-20 rule, right? And
Yeah, always.
20% of the operations produce about 80% of the food in the system, just like they do tennis shoes, eyeglasses, shirts, cars, anything else, right, that you want to
Yeah.
name in the world. And um, and the government is just refuses to accept that, right? We're still doing beginning farmer programs when the average age of farmers has been the same. We're panicking about it, right? They try to instill fear in us that all the farmers are going to disappear someday. But the reality is that if you look at what the average age is going to be, in 1933, they were worried about it being the same number that it is today.
It was 60 then and 60 now.
Yeah, and it may change 1 year up or down, give or
Yeah.
take. Right here, a couple of years ago, it actually went down a little bit because we had an unusual death rate among older people in the United States. Immediately, it popped right back the next year. I mean, it didn't even take 1 year for that to change itself. And we could have a whole show just on why that occurs. And that's maybe one of the issues inside of agriculture as an industry. But it doesn't address the questions that you were asking, the real question you were asking, which is why do we have this disparity? Why are they engaging in the middle of some stuff that's really none of their business? If people want to drink whole milk, raw milk, chocolate milk, strawberry milk, et cetera, if you allow the market to fixate on that, I understand the safety components from time to time, right? I understand why pasteurization became important in the United States because a lot of people are just irresponsible, don't understand how to actually keep their food clean and safe, and don't live near a farmer anywhere, right? I don't even today. I don't live near a farmer. It's 30 miles to where I could
Hmm.
actually acquire something to eat from a farmer. In the case of milk,
30 miles
that's a
and
little
3
bit.
hours later.
Yeah, 30 miles and yeah, an entire trip out to get a gallon of milk somewhere. But the but listen though, I mean, let's just be honest about let's just be honest about the fact that we just can't seem to stop asking government to fix problems when there's just no evidence that they ever do.
Zero.
Zero.
Zero evidence.
Yeah.
So I'm going to set this up, and then I got 2 minutes, just so you know, Jay. A friend of mine in Nebraska gave me a long story that I'm going to shorten, and I can shorten it and still be fairly accurate. But I believe this time frame occurred in the for early '90s. He and a couple of farmer families went to Bolivia, and I think that's the right country. Doesn't matter the country. This story doesn't alter. And they went to Bolivia and they went to some farms like farmers do when I go to Australia. I go to ranches or stations. And he wasn't there long, and it was then he started thanking the US farmer, my friend from Nebraska, for the CRP program.
Yeah.
He said, You're thanking me for CRP. Why? Well, you put $6 on our soybeans. And ended up he walked through what an acre of land was bringing before the CRP program in the United States and what it was bringing now. And it is increased to the tune of $6 per bushel. And so that was attributed to the fact that we were putting farmland in CRP instead of farming it, which allowed other countries in the world to
Yeah.
grow their footprint of the food that they produce. Jay
Yeah.
Truitt, that's where we'll pick it up. I set it up. I set the table for you to hit a home run when we get back with the last segment. Roll route right after this. I got to remind you about the nitric oxide. Dr. Nathan Bryan has all of the science about healthy living. I start every single morning with a nitric oxide tablet. It's the only supplement actually that I've taken in the past 18 years. I suggest that everybody needs to boost their nitric oxide content in their bloodstream. It's all about cardiovascular health. If you look at the continued growth of cardiovascular disease and problems in this country, and yet people think that they're doing something to fix it, we just continue to make it worse. Get the facts, get the science behind nitric oxide, no2u.com. No, number two, letter u.com. Trent is your coupon code. Don't take my word for it. Go listen to Dr. Nathan Bryan and get the actual science. no2u.com. Back with the last segment in 3, 2, 1. Welcome back. Trent Loos, Jay Truitt. I did not know that the two issues that took you to DC was the dairy buyout, which I'm now going to go revisit that whole situation because back in the 80s, I just knew the dairyman got paid to get rid of cows, and it had a big impact in the beef business. And then you had the same issue with just before that, the CRP. And those are the two things that took you to DC. And this CRP, and I believe we have currently, 35 million acres. And I see we're talking about taking 75 million acres out of farmland production for solar panels. But let's just talk about CRP, because the whole issue in the beginning was it has to qualify as highly erodible land that should have never been farmed. Well, I could put $15,000 an acre farmland in the CRP program today if I really wanted to. What's your take on this, Jay?
No, let's go. So let's go back to what was going on. So the early 1980s were some of the driest regions in the Midwest, right? Those are some of the driest years that a lot of people had in their crop history. We were coming off the heels and still experiencing some double-digit inflation. Bankruptcies were at a peak. Foreclosures were at a peak. We were losing operators right and left, and so the government solution was not to try to come up with something new. They took they called the Conservation Reserve Program was nothing more than the land bank reinvented that they had back in the 40s. And so two things happened on my family operation, and that resulted in my dad and I sitting on the tailgate of the pickup one day. And he said, "Hey, listen, somebody's going to have to go fix this. And I can't, so it has to be you." And he promptly went out and bought me a new blue jacket and sent me on a trip to DC. And really, it was the beginning the beginning of my political career. I did some other things as a part of that, but really it was always about trying to figure out how to straighten the system in Washington. And I did go and just lobbied on CRP and the dairy buyout, which that buyout crushed our operation because we were feeding slaughter cows at that point, cull cows, and turn them into hamburger, and they literally gutted us for months at a time. And so, it listen, if you go back to the original idea was that we're going to take the most erodible land, right? And that we're going to do this. And we came up with all these terms: HEL factors, T factors, soil categorization schemes. And that's when a lot of us that weren't really farmers, and I was a rancher, not a farmer, when we actually learned that there's multiple horizons in soil, and we panicked over what was happening in the Mississippi and how muddy it was, as if it hadn't been muddy since it started flowing, right? And we have all these, we start having all these conversations, and then somehow or another, we just don't utilize, and we required every government program to actually tie to that, right? If you didn't know your soil, a farmer could quote his T factor on soil in that day as fast as anything faster than he could probably tell you how much money he actually had in the bank. And yet today it doesn't even come up. It's not even in the register. And they go, "Oh, well, that's because we use minimum till and we use other things," right? Okay. Well, if you're in Texas, you just experienced The 2 out of the last 3 years have been the driest in history. They go all the way back to the 80s and maybe before to find a year that was drier than what they've just experienced. And nobody's talking about T factors, right? They talk about a little bit about wind erosion, but you talk about wind erosion in West Texas every day, right? When the sand blows and hits you in the face, you talk about wind erosion no matter what. But um, I, it was a joke. It was nothing more than literally a scheme to actually the whole world. What the U.S. was dominating the world to such an extent that some of the do-gooder types of folks in Washington D.C. that think they're being altruistic and helping the rest of the world decided to make one of these moves um, that would allow some other countries to take up the gap in space. And ending stocks didn't really change over time. They changed on a maybe a 1 year basis or partially for a couple of years, but over time, ending stocks, meaning capitalism, still drives overall world supplies to where world supplies need to be. The question is, where are you going to grow it? Are you going to grow wheat in Kansas, or are you going to grow it to the point that you tried to make in Australia or someplace else on planet Earth, whether it be South America or anywhere else? And we drove we drove a bunch of that acreage out of the United States. Now we're competing against it. And the same government policies. Listen, I'm not even going to blame government because a bunch of farmers were in town supporting this stuff back then. And we didn't learn a lesson because we just keep coming back, asking them to engage more and more and more in the system, right? Instead of less in the system, we ask them to engage more in the system. And so, I don't know what to do.
So
The people,
when did Brazil become a soybean powerhouse? Was that during the same period of time?
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Brazil went from being a rookie in the soybean business. It grew a lot of acres, but they didn't do it very well, to growing a whole bunch more acres and learning how to do it really well, starting in mid 1980s.
Jay, I knew 5 people when I lived in Illinois. 5 people that I never thought about it, but they probably signed up CRP acres and they went to Brazil. They didn't move,
Yeah.
but they
Oh,
bought and had
absolutely.
farming interest in Brazil. And
No, I
so it
had
was the U.S.
members.
farmer ingenuity that taught Brazil how to be a soybean powerhouse against us,
Yeah.
thanks to the federal government.
Yeah. I had members of my own family that went to Argentina and started farming operations, turned over virgin sod in the Paraná region of Argentina, and it's and turned it into truly competitive production zones. And they bought that land for virtually nothing, right?
Yeah.
And as far as I know, maybe they still own it. Actually, I'm not for sure if their heirs actually own it today, but it's certainly worth thousands of dollars more today than per acre than what it was when they bought it, because they bought it for about $40 an acre, and that was in the 80s. And so late 70s and early 80s, they could see this whole thing coming, and so they made the transition.
That's a parallel to the story that I was telling you about Bolivia. It was $40
Yeah,
an acre, and it ended up increasing to the tune of what equivalent of 40 bushel per acre plus $6 per bushel.
yeah,
Went
right.
to 300 an acre.
Right. And so we sit down, and and again we keep having this. Um, um, I know it's the wrong analogy, but I just don't have a better analogy. But it's literally like a drug addict that knows that they know that the drug that they're taking is bad for them, but they somehow that drug draws them to go back to the dealer and ask for more and ask for more and ask for more. And we're so the farm bill basically on Capitol Hill, right? Here's one of the interesting
Well,
things people in
before you go to the
agriculture.
farm bill on Capitol Hill, Hank has the perfect saying for this. It's like buying an alcoholic a liquor store and thinking he'll get
Yeah,
tired of drinking.
yeah, no, yeah, a little bit, right? It is exactly right. And somehow or another, he's going to run out. You
Yeah.
know, he'll run
All
out when he
right.
runs out of. No, but he will. It'll run out. He will run out eventually when he runs out of money. And that
Yeah,
becomes then the
exactly.
power that the government has back over us. And they took a short term situation regarding CRP, and like all the cards came together. It was a crippling effect that was taking place in agriculture. Anyone can admit that something dramatically had to happen. Interest rates were um, the base started in the low double digits and went from there up. Right? I mean, people were going broke at lightning speed if they had any debt. Okay, right? So the government is going to bail us out from a problem that really they kind of created through their foreign policy and the economic activities that they had taken that were a mistake on the energy side and on the banking side and in the capital financing and spending side. And now they're fixing that problem, which then becomes another problem further down the road when we increase food prices on finished food products. We have to actually increase nutrition spending for the people that can't afford it. And then we have to actually increase their social welfare safety net and just see how this actually goes, right? And at some point, the government has figured out how to actually get themselves involved in literally almost everybody's life in a controlling way. And uh, we had just avoided it and been really independent. And I actually think that almost all of agriculture gave away our independence when we
Mhm.
passed CRP.
I
And
agree
and
100%.
and we in the next two farm bills, we instituted new pricing policies to try to secure a financial safety net. But we did that already with the banks that the government could control a certain number of acres, and we kept negotiating with them to add that they wanted to add more acres, and so we would negotiate to add more acres, and that stepped its way up. And we're still doing it. We're still doing, again, you made the point. You can take the best farmland in the state of Iowa or Illinois that anyone by any measure would say, hey, this is the perfect farmland. It's growing 300 bushels of corn. It'll grow 100 bushels of wheat and 100 bushels of soybeans in good conditions. And I bet if you work at it enough and you're willing to do just certain things, you can actually get that enrolled in CRP. And it may be as flat as the table that I'm setting by this morning. And there may be almost zero erosion on that, but you can get it enrolled in the CRP program if you just really want to. And if you're
At 3 times the rate of what they were paying
at
before.
at significantly higher rates than what we
Yeah.
would have ever paid before. Because now we want 30% of the land set aside, and they've got to make those conditions somewhere. And we want 50% set aside by 2050. People
Yep.
should think about that. I just want to say this, right? Because it's something I
You
read the
have 30
case study of
seconds.
okay, the case study of what just happened in Sri Lanka on rice producers is a case study that farmers and ranchers in the United States should actually look at. The government managing that broke them. Their biggest market was China. They lost that market. Now China is actually having to grow rice to replace them, and they did it all because they kept trying to spend to fix level after level after level, and eventually they realized that all they needed to do is just actually plant rice in the first place
How about
and
that? Get back to the basics of taking
get
care of
back to the
land and
basics.
producing what people need without government intervention. For J. Truitt, Trent, Loos, we've journeyed down the path connecting food producers to food consumers. We both remind you that all roads do lead to a